Hi, welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials again. Welcome back. My name is Terry, and today we're going to be talking about Needle Turn Applique. And we'll go over some of the techniques. And we're going to start with a heart because a heart has your curve, your outer points, and your inner points. So that will get you started with practicing. Like any skill, any new thing that you're doing, it takes practice. And you have to build the skill up. And I'm still practicing myself. I'm going to be upfront with you. I am not an expert in this field. I've been learning, and I'm going to share with you the things that I have learned that I have found have helped for me. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm utilizing my long arm table today just because I have a little more space to sit down, and at my sewing table I'm a little more scrunched in. The machine takes up a lot of space, so I wanted some open space to be able to work and show you some things. So some of the things that you'll need, I'll show you what you definitely will need, and some things that are helpful. So I'm going to be using a batik. Batiks don't fray as much. I know you're seeing some fraying on this, but this just came out of my scrap pile. And I don't really have a lot of scrap batik at the moment. So we're going to use this piece today to practice with. But the reason why the batiks are a little bit easier to applique with is because they have a tighter weave and they don't fray quite as badly. So we're going to use that. Some other fabrics have a nicer, tighter weave to them and fray a little less. I found this fabric was working pretty well for me from Hoffman. It is a little bit tighter, not as quite as tight of a weave, so it does fray a little bit more as you're working with it. So also the aged muslin works really well because I don't have fraying problems with that at all. And I recommend to start with something like that before you work with a fabric that's going to fray too much on you, just because it's less tedious and a lot easier to work with. I'm going to do this piece on white with some brown thread so that you'll be able to see the stitches a little bit better. Technically, normally I wouldn't use a brown thread, but today I'm going to, and I'm going to use a 60 weight today. And you could use a 60 weight thread at any time if you don't mind the stitching showing just a little bit more. Your better hiding thread, it would be your silk thread, which we carry. The fine silk thread, this is made in Japan. It is wonderful thread to work with. It hides super well. And on this piece, if I was to use this, you almost wouldn't be able to see my stitches at all. So I'm not going to use that today. And there's also Wonderfill. And, you know, that's 100 weight. The higher the number, the thinner the thread. So also we have the Wonderfill, which is a soft poly, and this stuff is 100 weight as well, and it is great to work with. I love it. You could use an 80 weight as well, but like I said, today I'm going to use the 60 weight mostly so that you can see the stitches. Now, something that you may not need, but I find helpful for me, is this magnifying glass. Some people use magnifier glasses. Some people don't need them at all, and that's lovely. I didn't used to, but as I get older, my eyes are a little weaker. This goes around my neck, and I just sit it on my chest, and it kind of hangs forward so that I can see my work underneath it, and it just brings my work a little bit closer to me. There are times when I'm working with smaller pieces that has come in handy. Like I said, it's not something, I've had that for years, back when I was doing cross stitch and whatnot, and it comes in handy quite often. And actually it comes in handy when I'm having to tear out long arm stitching, which I dread doing at any time, but that comes in really handy for that. So let's talk about needles. Now, I've experimented with some different needles. I started using some number 9 sharps. These work really well in basting. The number 9s work really well to baste your piece onto your background fabric. Now, you can use pins, and we'll get to those in just a minute. But the sharps, being a number 9, are a little bit thicker, and so I only use these when I'm basting. I'm going to put my things back in here so I don't lose track of them. So then, as I was learning, I tried, and I really like John James. Those are John James sharps. I tried the, and I like both of these. I like both the milliners and the straw. The milliners are a little more flexible, and I've heard that they don't wear as long. So you end up needing to buy a little bit more needles, is what I'm being told about these. But I really like them for some projects. When I need a little more flexibility in my needle, I really like the size 11s to work with. Number 10s, I've been told, do just as well. But I do like the number 11s personally myself. Now the straws are really nice. They're a sturdier needle, not as flexible, but I really do like these. So for me, it's between the milliners and the straw needles. And once again, size 11. And I've heard that these last a little bit longer than the milliners. I haven't used them long enough to be able to confirm or deny one way or the other on that. I'm just sharing with you information that I've heard. So, I probably should keep a needle out, mind you. I'm going to need one for our project. And so that's basically where I am with the needle information. I haven't opened this package yet. I don't know where I put my other package. These are very fine needles. They're still pretty flexible. And they're the same length as the milliners, I think. So that's where we are with needles. And I recommend that you try both the milliners and the straw needles and see which ones you like the best. The 11s have a very tiny hole at the top. Let's see how the now this is a needle threader, and I'll tell you, this to me is a must-have in the world of applique, because it holds your needle. So you put your needle in upside down, and you want the eye of the needle facing this way. And I have a hard time sometimes seeing the eye of the needle. Let me get a piece of thread. Now basically you want your thread to be, I don't know, 18, 25, 26 inches, somewhere in there. So basically I just hold my thread and I just pull it up a little bit past my elbow, and sometimes I go just a little bit longer than that. But they recommend that you hold your thread and go up to your elbow for your size. And so I'm just going to lay my thread down, and it goes down into like this little groove down here, and you press on your little paddle and let go of it, and then you slowly pull your, let me see if I can do this so that you'll be able to see it. You slowly pull your needle up, and you will have a little loop there sticking out. Let me see if I can let go and get it in here so that you can see it. There's a little loop sticking through the needle, and I just pull that through. And it's really that quick and easy. There's a thread cutter on this side that can come in handy. I really find that a must have. I really could not imagine myself trying to sit there and thread my needle because I have a hard enough time seeing the eye of the needle. With silk thread, it is so slippery and fine that when I was appliquing, I found that sometimes I went to applique and my thread had slipped out of the needle, and that's frustrating. Then you have to stop and rethread your needle. So what I do is I just tie about three knots. I tried 2, but then that came apart because, like I said, the silk thread is very slippery, and I found it came out of the knot. So I just hold it, and I'm just doing a regular knot, nothing fancy, and you haven't got to worry, it's going to go through the applique just fine. It didn't hold anything up. It didn't stop my process at all. I saw this mentioned in a tutorial that I was watching, and I tried it out. And though the person who I was watching, some of their other techniques weren't working for me quite as well. Some did and some didn't. This was a very handy, helpful hint. So I do 3 knots at the end of my needle. And this, once you're done and you're switching out to a new piece of thread, you just clip it along the bottom, and it comes right off your needle when you do that. And I just kind of give it a couple tugs, and as I get going, that will stay in place. So now, to make your end knot, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get this into the video. The other day when I was doing it, I noticed that a couple of my helpful hints weren't showing up as well in the video. So I'm redoing my video today because I want to make sure that you're going to be able to see the things that I'm doing and showing you. So to tie our knot, you're going to hold your thread out like this. I'm really hoping that this is going to show up well because there's no way for me to zoom when I'm recording, unfortunately, unless I'm using my back camera. And unfortunately, when I'm recording, it's hard for me to see what is recording. So there's a little bit of a balance that goes on here. So I'll hold this up in the light as best I can. So I have my thread here sticking out. And I'm going to lay my thread. I'm going to lay the thread onto my finger, and I'm going to lay my needle on it. And then I'm going to use my other hand, and I'm going to twist around. Some say 6 times. I lost count. I like about 8 times. It makes it just a little bit bigger of a knot, and even though this makes somewhat of a small knot, it holds very well. So you're going to hold that in your fingers like this, And then you're going to take your other hand, keeping that piece out there that's sticking out that we first had, and you have your other thread coming out this way, and you've twisted around 6-8 times, whatever you feel good about, and you'll see as you're making your knots what looks, you know, what you feel more comfortable with, what you like better. So then you're just going to lay your finger down on that, hold it tight, grab the back of it, try not to poke yourself, push your needle up, and then you're just going to take your needle, holding those threads from both sides. You're just going to pull your needle up and through, and you're going to end up with a knot with a little bit of a tail. Now this does take a little bit of practice to get used to. It took me a couple times, and now I'm getting the hang of it a little bit better. And there is a knot right about there, but I don't want that long of a tail on there. Maybe about a 1/2 inch of a tail is fine, so I'm just going to clip that end off, and I'll show you when we start that holds really well. So let's just set that aside for a minute until we get started. I like to keep a small ruler around for my projects, especially this one I'm keeping in my little bag kit that I'm using right now. Maybe eventually I'll get one of those cute little sewer boxes to keep my applique stuff in. But for the moment I have like a little bag that has a bunch of pockets that came with my sewing cabinet, and I'm using that. I've been trying to find a purpose for it anyways. So this will need just until we get used to the 3/16 that we need for our seam allowance. And so you just need a small ruler. Doesn't need to be very big. You could even have, you know, a little 2x2 that you keep in there. You don't really, need a big one. Just something for that measurement. Some like to have a thimble. We have some really nice Bowen leather thimbles, and they come in different sizes. I believe that there's a small, medium, and a large. And this is mostly for your under finger that you're going to use. It depends on what finger you use. I tend to use this finger underneath. Some were saying to use your middle finger, and for me, that's very awkward. It feels awkward for me. I've gotten used to, now that I've been practicing, not using a thimble underneath at all. This is so you don't poke your finger that you're holding underneath to hold your pieces, you know, in place. But if you have tender fingers, this will come in very handy. So this is a depending whether you need it or not. You have to make your own choice on that. There's also some metal ones. I find for me that those slip off, and then I'm chasing them all over my house, and frustrates me. Okay, so there's that. I do have a blade saver that I leave around to quickly cut threads. I use it at my sewing machine. I probably need to get it, well, I have one on the threader, so that's helpful. But if you're not using that kind of a threader, and you're using a different kind of a threader, or if you're just in heaven and able to thread your own needles, that's lovely. Then the blade saver comes in handy, and we have those available as well. I have some little leaves that I'm getting ready to do a flower on a project, so I have some little leaves cut out. I'm going to set those aside. These are pretty pins, applique pins. We also have the regular pins. The applique pins are shorter, and I think a little thinner. And they're just a really nice size. Man, it's so hard to get things to show up in the camera. but they're just a really nice size to have for your applique. They're very tiny. I'm not sure I'm getting them to show up very well, but they're just very tiny pens, and these are super sharp, and they work really well. And you really do need some applique pens, whether you choose to baste after you've pinned some bigger projects. Sometimes people like to baste them on first. I'm not a baster. That's just not my thing. But I did find those sharps were handy. Maybe if I was doing a larger project, maybe I would want to baste my piece down. But for the hearts right now, I'm finding that just having a few pins to hold my piece down is working really well. So I like having those. I don't need that. That can go out of the way. So for scissors, some people like to use the blunt nose scissors so that they're, you know, if you're, that's for a different kind of an applique, like if you already have your piece down and you're having to cut pieces out, like with reverse applique and whatnot, some people like the blunt nose so that they're not cutting their backing fabric. I like to use serrated scissors, and I can barely read that. That's where this will come in handy, because I can't remember her name at the moment. Karen Buckley. These are wonderful scissors. I found that many of the applique people recommend these scissors. I already had them, fortunately, so I was very happy. And when you cut your fabric, it's serrated, so it helps so that your fabric doesn't fray as much. It's almost like these are micro serrated, but it's almost like having pinking shears, sort of, in a micro form. And I find them very helpful. But you will need some scissors around to cut your pieces and so forth. So a couple of things that aren't must-haves, but I like to have them. I have found them to be a little bit handy. I keep Fray Check around when I'm appliquing, especially if I'm doing reverse applique, because I will go around the edges of anywhere that I feel might fray on me, and this prevents it from fraying. So for me, I'm not perfect. I haven't perfected my skill yet. So I'm finding that the stop fraying sometimes I use on an inner point after I've finished my piece. Sometimes I will dab just 1 or 2 little drops into that, and it prevents it from fraying on me, and I haven't got to worry about it. So that's just another handy thing to have on hand. I have the Bowen temporary glue that I keep on hand. I like it at my sewing desk, and now I'm liking it for my applique. Now this, if you're using the batik fabric, it's not going to have the fraying that you have with a lot of other fabrics. I was using this one other fabric the first time that I did some hand applique, and it just kept raveling and raveling as I was going around, and I was getting frustrated. I was feeling like I was losing my seam allowance, and it was driving me nuts. And so I ended up going around the edges a little bit with the Fray Check to help me out. But this, some people, whenever they have an area that they have to clip, and this will be the only area that we're going to clip with our needle turn. Now, the other time that you would maybe clip something is when you're doing an inner curve, and we're not going to do the inner curves today. We'll come back to that at a later lesson. But when you clip for an inner point, you're going to clip all the way to your seam allowance. And so what some people will do is they'll take their needle, not their pin, but their needle that they're stitching with, and they'll just rub it across the top of this and get just a smidget of glue. Not a lot. You don't want a glob on there. Just a little smidget. And then what they'll do is in that crevice where you've clipped, right down in here, real close to the fabric, when they sew, they'll sew down to this side, then they'll put a little bit of this glue on their pin, and they'll pinch that, and they'll just pinch a little bit of glue up under there, and they'll let that glue off under there so that as they turn this, it holds the piece down for you because you have that little smidget of glue under here, and it holds your piece down a little bit better. So for some people, they really like that, and they have found that to be a handy technique. I've been testing it out. I tend to like it a little bit, so sometimes I'm using it. Sometimes I've been more confident as I've been going, and I haven't felt like I needed it. I feel like as my stitching gets a little bit better, that may not be a necessity, but it also might be dependent on the piece that you're working with. So another thing that you'll want to have on hand is either some permanent or some temporary markers or some chalk markers. So it's going to kind of depend on what you're working with. A lot of people will tend to like the permanent Sharpies. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with them yet or not. I think I'm going to have to play with my applique a little bit more to see if I like these or not. But it is helpful when you're tracing to have a marker. You don't want to ever use ink pen. I've heard that pencil lead works because pencil lead washes out. The Frixion pens that remove with heat, or not heat, well, they will remove with heat, but also with the eraser tip, or when you're washing, they will come out. The reason that you don't want to use a ballpoint ink pen is because ink, when you wash, has a chance to adhere. The pigment in the ink has a chance to adhere and run. So it's highly not recommended to use that. Now, some people like the Frixion pens, some don't. Some worry about them. None of my quilts are going anywhere where they're going into shows or anything like that, and they're not going to sit in extreme heat, and they're not going to sit in extreme cold. So I'm not worried about them at the moment in my life. So I use them. It's totally up to you. And I also like the Bowen, and you'll hear from me in my tutorials, I love Bowen products. I like the chalk pen because I can just click on the top and my chalk comes down, and it's a very thin chalk. I do have another, might be by Clover, I can't remember, a thicker chalk pen as well that I use for different kinds of projects. So find what you're comfortable with marking. What you're going to be able to see afterward is important. Now, I make my templates. I just downloaded. All I did was I went online and I looked up heart color book pages. There are all kinds of color book pages out there that are free to print and free to use. So then I printed out a page, and I used the freezer paper. We have freezer paper available. It's great. I used 2 pieces together. So what I did was I took the 8.5 by 11 inch sheet, and I cut my sheet in half because I knew I was only going to need half of a sheet. And then I ironed them together. The shiny side will adhere. So depending on what I'm doing to use this for a template. So what I do is I'll lay one shiny side down on the dull side and I iron the two pieces together, okay? Then I trace out my design on it and cut it out. So if I lay this down on a piece and I press over it, it will adhere temporarily to my fabric. And then after I've traced, I can just lift it up. And I can use this multiple times. I think 20 something times I would be able to reuse my template. But I'm not going to press it today. I don't have my iron going and I'm not going to bother with it. But what I am going to do is I'm going to trace around this. And actually I am going to use one of the markers today just because it will make it more visual and easier for me to see without having to use my magnifying piece. So I'm just going to trace around. Now when I did the starch, you may have seen my starch applique or starch based applique. I had talked about when you make your template, if your edges around are not smooth, it will affect your piece. That's not the same with this. So I didn't have to worry about whether or not it's smooth or not, but if you would like it to be a little smoother, you can just use a emery board along the edge. And that emery board will just smooth down. Just use the finer side of the emery board and you can just go back and forth over your edges and smooth them out. And I've been able to use this multiple times. I haven't exactly counted, but I've been using it a lot. I've been practicing with hearts. I've been practicing with leaves and flower petals and moving along. That's what I'm practicing with right now. So we'll just slip that in there. So now what I do is I go around my edge. And so this is the part, whoops, got a little bit of ink through there. I shouldn't have, but I didn't want to get it on my table since it's permanent marker. We're going to do a 3/16 of an inch. So this is difficult because I don't have a ruler on hand that is 3/16. These are measured in eighths on my ruler. Now, if you have a small ruler that you can keep with your applique that is that has the 16th measurements on it, that's lovely. But if you don't, you know that each one of these marks is an eighth, okay? Going across. So what I'm going to do is I know that 3/16, so a 16th is going to be a line between these two lines, okay? So this is an eighth, that's an eighth. It will be the line between. So I know that I have 1/8 here, 1/16 here rather, 2/16 here, and my 3/16 is going to be between these two black lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure up around my piece, and I found that this made it easier for me. Wait a minute. From the other side. So I just lay my ruler up against my marking and I just make a little dash, and I'm just going to do that approximately about an inch apart. You don't have to do back-to-back dashes for this. It's just to kind of give you a way to eyeball it as you go around. So approximately every inch, I'm just going to make a little dash that shows my 3/16. So I know where I need this to be for my seam allowance. And I'm going to draw a line down here just so that I can tell where from my center point my 3/16 is. And I'm also going to do that right from the center where I'm going to be doing my inward point. And then that way I know where my clip is going to be. Now this is a practice piece for me, so, whoops. Yeah, this way. So you're gonna, you know, I'm using marker on it because I really don't care. And it will give me a chance to test out and see if I like the marker or not. I just sometimes worry that it's going to show up. And I would not want it to show up on a piece that I was actually trying to do on a quilt. Now, eventually, just like those of us that sew 1/4 of an inch all the time and do binding all the time, we get so that we don't need to mark our binding for that 1/4 of an inch when we're coming off the edge. But when you haven't, when you're just learning, it helps to make the marks. So this is the same kind of a deal. You just, you know, until you get used to 3/16 of an inch, I can kind of see 1/4 of an inch in my mind. I'm told that 1/4 of an inch is just a little too much of a seam allowance for your applique, though some I've heard do go by the 1/4 of an inch, but I've been told by many that it's not a good idea. That 3/16 is the general rule for your seam allowance for your needle turn applique and hand stitch applique. So I'm going to go and I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to cut where my dashes are, and I'm just using my dashes so that I know where I need to cut this out. Now some do this in reverse. They have a larger piece and they do their dashes on the inside to see their seam allowance on the inside because they're cutting on the more solid line. But I wanted to use a little bit of a bigger heart, so I'm using the dashes for a cutting guide. Technically, what you would have done if you cut it out on a solid line, you would do your dashes on the inside to see your seam allowance. But I will have this more solid line actually to show me my seam allowance. So I'm kind of doing it in reverse. Now, I'm not a perfect cutting person. This won't be cut out perfect, but it will be close enough. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish cutting this out. And I'm not going to do my clips yet. I'm going to do my clip when I come around. Move that piece out of my way. I will do, and for this piece, you only need to clip once. I know when we did the starch-based one, we did some clips up around the edges. And now that I've been doing the needle turn, I have a conflict in my mind about whether or not you really needed to do those clips around the edges. I find that if you do clips around the edges on a curve, what happens is you'll end up with little pieces that stick out awkward. It doesn't get a smooth turn in your fabric. So we're not going to do any clipping around those edges. The only clip that we're going to make is in the center here. just going to nip that little piece down there. There we go. Okay. So I think I'm safe to throw, well, I don't know. I might save that. I'm starting to wonder if I shouldn't have given away all my smaller pieces. I recently donated all my scrap fabric and some yardage that I don't use anymore. So I donated off a lot of fabric. And I started back with an empty basket for my scraps, and it's starting to fill back up. But it doesn't have, I don't have a lot of, I don't usually keep small pieces, but maybe I should be. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pin our piece down. I almost forgot to do that step, mind you. And I'm going to put a pin here in the center area just to hold that in place temporarily for me. And I'm not going to put a lot of pins in. You could also hand base this piece on if you wanted. I'm not probably, well, I put one pin here. It's not wanting to cooperate with me. There we go. I'll put one down where my point is to keep that in place. And I'm just going to do a couple around. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. If you keep your pins in, every once in a while your thread is going to try to wrap around your thread when you're pulling through. So that's why some people like to baste their piece together. But for smaller ones, I just use pins. I'm getting a little bit better about not getting hung up. And probably I jinxed myself by saying that, but there we go. You're going to see some little dots on my white fabric. Not a big deal for me because this isn't a keeper piece. It's just a practice piece. So I'm not worried about it. Now, if I was to do my marker, I would have laid that on cardboard so that the marker didn't go through onto my backing fabric, of course. So just, ow, do be careful of poking yourself, mind you. Now, if you fold your fabric underneath, one of my mistakes in the beginning is that I folded my fabric over here so I could hold this a little bit better and get my fingers where I wanted them. I accidentally had it folded and I sewed that piece, and that was fun. So you don't want to do that because that will just irritate you. So you want to bring your needle up from the bottom of your applique piece, not your backing. And this will put your knot and that little tail so it stays hidden in there. So when I pull up, even though I give it a little bit of a jerk, that little tiny knot stays in there really well. It doesn't come out. I'm going to see if I can get this so that you'll be able to see it well. Now I'm still getting used to how to hold everything and do my stitches. My stitches are coming out a lot better, so I'm really pleased with that. So you're going to take the very edge, you know, the point of your needle, and that's why they call it needle turn, is because you're using the needle to turn your fabric under. So you just barely poke your fabric up here. You want your finger, your thumb, to be straight across, holding your piece, and your fingers underneath. And so you're just going to take your needle, use the, you know, the long edge that you're not holding on your needle, and you're going to use that and poke your thread just a little bit, and you push it under. So for this first part, I'm just going to get that fold. I want to get it near where my thread came up through. And then once I have a nice straight line, and I can see where I want it to be, where my thread came through, right here, then you just take your needle and you can run it back and forth, or you can take your thumb and run your thumb back and forth. And I don't go way up ahead of myself. I'm just going to have a little bit turned to start with. You want to keep your needle straight when you're on a straightaway working, so that your stitches stay fairly straight. And also, you'll notice afterward that you have like little dashes. The little dashes, we'll take a look at that in a little bit. So you want your needle to go down right where your thread is coming out on your piece. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to hold this in a way that you're being able to see everything that I'm doing. So you have your thread coming out. Sometimes I just hold my thread to the side like this so I can see where it's coming out. And I poke my needle, and the needle is only going into the backing piece. And then you're kind of going to rocket your needle with your bottom fingers and your thumb. And you want that needle to come through a couple of threads over from the edge. If you get into the very last thread of your fabric to the edge, it will end up having a fraying problem down the road. So you want to come over 2 to 3 thread spaces over to the side, but not too far. Like, you don't want to come way over here. That will end up making your stitches show way too much. And you're just going to be doing tiny stitches going through. So right next to where that thread's coming out of my piece is where I want my needle to go back down, but I want it to go only in the backing fabric. So you can always put your needle up against your edge and just, I got it stuck to my finger underneath, and just rock, kind of use your hand to rock it with. And see, I'm coming too close to the edge right there, so I'm going to back my needle out and come back over so that I'm getting a couple of thread spaces over. And I know that this might be just a little bit hard to see. Even though I'm using a darker thread, I can tell that my thread's even being a little bit harder to see. And so just keep working your way straight down your piece and keeping that straight. Now when I come to a part where my fabric is jutting out and I'm losing my space to be able to stitch, I just move my thumb down and I'm going to grab that piece again right at the edge, if it would cooperate with me today. And I'm just going to poke it back underneath. And when I can see that I have a nice straight line the way that I want it, then I can rub my needle up against it. You could take your needle and you can put it up underneath and run it down and kind of push up against your fabric, and that will give you a nice straight line there. And I have a little bit of shakiness to my hands that I can't do anything about. I'm sorry. And you want to keep your stitches a lot, even, and it takes practice getting those stitches evenly spaced from each other. It's a balance of getting your needle in there, keeping it parallel to your fabric, and coming up. And with me being on camera, I'm feeling, I get to feeling like this urgency to get going. So I'm not spending all day on a piece stitching it. So my stitches aren't quite as even as when I'm sitting and I'm more relaxed. So, probably your stitches should be about a 1/16 of an inch apart from each other. Now that one I went in just a little too much. I went over just a little too much. And instead of just nipping the edge so that my stitches don't show, that will show just a little bit more. And you just keep pushing your piece under, seeing if you like your line, and then you can run your needle up underneath and over the top, or you can use your thumb. And so I'm just going to get this going along so that we can get down towards our point. I do better when I'm just sitting relaxed. With a movie playing in the background or some nice music. And then my stitches are a lot more even. And so you'll see on the back, my stitches aren't perfectly even, mind you, but you will see little dashes. And as you practice more, and definitely when you're more relaxed, these will be a little bit more even, but you should be seeing spaces between your stitches that's showing that your thread is coming down into your backing fabric and then back up into your applique piece. And you do have to keep maneuvering your piece so that it sits in your hand the right way. I like stitching forward away from me. Some people like to stitch towards them. And I find that a little more awkward, but it would be the same thing. You would just be moving your fabric up here. You would have your needle go in beside your piece and rock it up under. And when you're going to tuck your piece up under, you would do the same thing with your thumb. And you would just tuck your piece under. For me, this is more awkward, but some people prefer that way. You have to find what's most comfortable for you in doing this. How holding it is more comfortable so that you can get your stitches. And I'm still working on that whole getting comfortable with it. But I do find this relaxing when I'm sitting with a little bit of music or a movie on. Just a few more stitches and I'll be down to the point, and then we can take a look at how we handle that. And this is the other thing, is this would be a mistake. If you have your needle go down and then you turn your hand, your stitches are not going to be very well. And you have to really think about this as you're doing it. And I might have made a mistake a couple times doing that. When I'm sitting by myself, you have to remember to keep your needle parallel and use your other hand to rock with. Otherwise, that's when my stitches tend to come further in than what I want them to. I just need them to be a couple thread spaces from the edge. And so you really have, in the beginning, when you're doing this, you have to think about what's working what. You want your fingers over here to be putting your needle down and keeping your needle straight. And then you want to use these fingers over here to rock your fabric. That's a little bit too close to the edge. And it takes a little bit of practice. So as we get closer, I'm going to take that pin out because I don't need it. And some are going to tell you to clip your piece after you've sewn this side of it. We're actually going to use that piece. And I'm going to get that a little bit straighter so it's on my line. I want my point to be straight. And if you mess it up like I just did, just pull it back out with your pin. And then grab back a hold of your piece and tuck it under. And when I get a line the way that I like it to be, then I smooth it out on the top and the bottom. And I'm just going to finish up and get closer to that point so I can show you the point. I'm having more problems with that edge. Here we go. Move that underneath me so I can get it out of my way. And it's a little more awkward for me sitting at a table instead of with everything in front of me. So as you get closer to your point, you want your stitches to get just a little bit closer together so that you can support the side of that point. And when I get right down to the point, I'm going to have my needle go down. And this is one time when my needle will kind of go to the side and go straight in to the bottom of that point. And you want to try not to manipulate a lot down here with your needle because you don't want to cause a fraying. And once I've gone in that point, I will tug with this just a little bit, not hard because you don't want to break your thread, but just tug with it just a little bit, straighten it out, you know, to get that point to go nice and straight. So now this is at the point where some will tell you to lift this piece up and they clip a little bit off their fabric right in here. Not a lot, but they will clip just a little bit of this fabric right in here to take what they consider to be some of the bulk out. Let me re-tug on that a little bit. Now you don't want to try to fold it under real close, because if you do, then what happens is this folds and causes a pleat, and that would not be the correct way. You want to grab a hold of the edge, and you kind of want to be getting your pin in the top of your applique piece, but also in that piece that's folded under. And you're going to kind of hold your thumb and you want it to be kind of straight across. And I'm grabbing that fabric underneath, mind you. Okay. So grabbing both pieces, I'm going to tuck this, well, maybe if I can stop grabbing that fabric underneath. This is easier to do when I'm doing it by myself. So I'm going to tuck that underneath, and you kind of want to bring your needle down. It's not doing it at the moment. Wait a minute. Let me turn this a little bit better. So you're going to get a hold of your piece there, and you're going to see this piece, the bottom here, lift up and be twirling in, like so. And when I get it the right way, it does it nicely. And so I'm kind of pushing that in there without grabbing on. And I want to push it so that it's flat down up against here. I want it to be flat in there. And you can kind of wiggle it a little bit with your fingers and feel that it's sitting flat in there. And once I have it flat, I'm going to run my needle in again and make sure that it's nice and flat up against this bottom stitching. And then I'm going to take my pen and I'm just going to push this piece under a little bit more and kind of roll this with my fingers a little bit, making sure that I have this nice and smooth. And you can see with a little tug there that I've got a nice point. So then I'm going to take my pen, or my needle rather, and I'm not going to be having it parallel to the side. I'm going to go down in the fabric where that thread is into the backing fabric at the same space that that thread's coming out from my point. And I'm going to put one more stitch, one more safety stitch right in that point. And you want to make sure you're not coming out too far. You want to be close to your, right where it was before. And pull that through and just give it a little bit of a tug. And then you can turn your piece again so that, get it comfortable in your hand again, so that you're going to be going back up your side. And we're going to keep a few stitches here, 3-4 stitches here, close together so that we support the other side of our point. And then once again, I want to straighten myself back out. So I'm going to move my piece around a little bit so I can keep my needle going straight. And just, 2, 3 or so stitches on that side closer together will keep that point nice and sharp for you. And then we're going to go back to stitching straight up the side. I don't have that tucked under quite as much as I would like it to. My marker is showing. And so once I'm up past my point, so that came out pretty straight. You don't want your point to end. You know, if I was to have my needle going in at an angle, it would cause my point to push over and not be straight down. So as I go up my side, once again, just use your needle, push your piece under. If you're liking the straight line that you have, then you can run your needle up underneath and finger press it, and then go back to keeping, you know, working both hands. Your needle, I'm gonna have problems with saying pin and needle, I'll tell you. Your needle going down where you're on the same side that your thread's coming out, and then rocking it so that it goes up into your applique piece. And the more that you practice, like I said, you'll build a consistency for your stitches, for your spacing. And then as I go, when I can see that a pin's going to be in my way, I just pull it out and get rid of it. And then once again, as I'm going up, just grab your piece with your needle, push it up underneath, get it nice and straight. Run your needle up underneath your fabric, straighten it out. And if you decide that you don't like it, you can just pull that back out with your needle and then push it back under again and see if you're liking it better. And if you feel that it's better, then finger press it and get it smoothed out, and you can run your needle up underneath, make sure it's flat, and then go back to stitching. And when you get up to a space and you can see that you get a little bit of a pocket there, you know that you gotta tuck your piece back under. Now we're going to be going into our curve here shortly. Now I'm hoping that as I'm doing this that I'm not talking too low. It's hard because I'm trying to concentrate on what I'm doing so I show it properly, and then I end up talking a little bit lower than I want to. I'm hoping that my microphone is helping. So as you get to a point where you see you get a little bit of a pocket there, and you don't want that piece to be in the way when you do your stitches, so just move your finger up a little bit, grab that edge with your needle, and just tuck that under. Now we're going to be starting to get up to our curve. And I'm sorry, this is probably a little bit longer of a tutorial than I was expecting, just because I'm a little slower at this than maybe somebody that's been doing it for a long time. So we're just going to continue to do our stitches up until we get to that curve. when we get to the curve, oh, excuse me a minute, had a little bit of a tickle in my throat. As we get up towards the curve, once we get a little bit closer, we'll start to do closer together stitches again as we go around the curve. Now, some of mine, if you're not holding the needle properly, you know, straight up against, that's when I start to come in just a little too much down in here, and my stitches go over further. And I don't get them quite as good as I should be. Now, see, that piece didn't turn under the way that I wanted, so I'm going to pull that back out before I finger press it, and I'll grab against it again and just use the side and your thumb, and then once it's nice and straight. Now normally you wouldn't want your, of course, your marker. For me, this is why I wouldn't want to use a marker on my fabric, because then I'm going to be over concentrated on whether or not that's going underneath the way that it should, and mine isn't all the time. Normally, I don't use marker. I either use chalk or I use one of the pens that will heat erase. And I do end up poking my finger underneath a little bit every once in a while, and it kind of slows me down. But when I use the thimble, for me, sometimes I was catching the thimble, so that was frustrating me. And like I said, try to make sure that you're coming in a couple threads. So see, that's like way too close to the edge, which is what I did in my last stitch. You want to make sure that you're coming up at least 2 thread spaces over. And it's really hard to get into the camera and show, but you want to be coming up a couple of thread spaces over. About like that. If I'm coming up right in the crease, eventually that's going to fray and it's not going to hold as sturdy. So you want to be coming over a couple thread spaces over when you're doing this. And I hope that you're watching this ahead of time. So you're seeing not only some of my mistakes, so that you'll you know, I'm trying to explain when I do make a mistake, so that you can see the difference. So as I'm going into a curve, I'm going to have my finger just a little bit, move this around so I can hold it better, have my thumb so it's right there, and I'm going to slowly be working my curve as I go, and I'm almost getting up to my curve, and I'm probably showing you a little bit more stitching through than maybe what some do. Just because it gives you a little more chances to see. So now I'm going to move this around a little bit, because I'm going to start going into my curve. And I'm just going to gradually be moving my piece under as I go, and see how I kind of flick that. So when I turned it with my needle, I kind of came up and push it this way, because I'm starting to want that to curve. So let's do that again. So I'm just going to slip that underneath like that, but I'm going to I'm kind of coming with my needle down, and I'm pushing that, and I'm holding it with my thumb so that I can start to create that curve that I want to be getting, and making sure that I have the edge of my fabric under there, mind you, at the same time. And once I start to see that it's beginning to do my curve the way that I want, then I'll go back, and I'm going to be doing a little bit, that's wrong because I have my needle held wrong, mind you. Let me get that tuck back under. It's a little hard to do in the camera. But you want to be keeping your needle somewhat straight going up through here. And a little bit closer together stitches. So it's going to go around that curve smoothly. I keep poking my finger underneath. That's why you get that little, I don't know if you're hearing the little pop sound every so often, but it's me trying to get the needle out of my finger. These needles are super sharp. They're not poking through my finger. It's just grabbing like the edge of my skin every so often, which prevents it from rocking the way that I want it to. So now I'm starting to get a little more up into my curve. And once again, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to poke that under and use it this way to the side to kind of get it going. And I want to see that I'm getting, that I'm still going into the curve that I want. I'll be happier when I stop when I get so I'm not poking my finger as much. It's not hurting or anything, it's just frustrating because it's almost holding me back in a way. So now right here, it's starting to want to go straight, but I need it to curve. So I'm just going to start working it. Into that curve. Let me see. And anytime that you don't like how it's pushing underneath, like I don't like that, it's lumpy, it's not looking good, and it's partly the way that I'm holding it at the moment. So I'm just going to re-stuff it under there and take my needle and turn it the other way. And I'm starting to want to get that to curve just a little more. So I'm using my needle underneath to get that curve. I'm going to take that pin out because that's going to create some resistance in this area for me being in the way. And you'll just keep working that fabric with your needle and your fingers, smoothing it. Now you have to be careful because see this little piece is like poked out right here when I turned it. If I stitch it now, that's going to stick out and look awkward on my heart. So I'm going to pull that piece back out. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tuck it back under. And this is a little bit of a slower part for me. because I've got to work around that curve and keep it so that it actually curves and doesn't stay straightish. And I just kind of wiggle it a little bit and make sure that it's staying in that curve. And I'm doing, or trying to do, closer together stitches as I'm going into that curve. And you got to move it so that you're comfortable, so that your hands are comfortable. And that was just a little bit too much of a turn all at once with the fabric, so I'm going to pull that back out. And just gradually get it under there. And just as I can see that I'm getting, so I'm staying curved, going around, I'm going to pull that back out just a little bit. I'm going to put my needle up underneath and see how it's kind of floppy under there. I'm going to stick that back under, and then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to use my needle to go right around that edge on the inside. And if you can see that you're getting a little too much fabric under there, you can just pluck it back out and work with it again. And you just want to smooth it around. Just take a look at it and see that it's nice and smooth. You can use both of your fingers to smooth that edge so that it's going into that curve. And the heart really is good to practice with for this. Now, if I was using more matchy thread, you wouldn't be seeing my stitches going up through. But if I had used matchy stitches, thread rather, then you wouldn't be seeing my stitches. And I wanted you to be able to see them a little bit. So I got to readjust my fingers here so I can get my piece where I need it. And there's some practice with getting used to how to hold it, what works best for you. And so I'm going to use my needle and my finger right here to edge that around because I want it to stay going into my curve. I don't want to have it go straight on me. So I just readjust where I'm holding as I go. And you can see how this piece, like how it's poked out, I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to take my needle and put it right up under my fabric. After I get it back under there, mind you. And it's okay if you got to start again. And as you're going around the curve, it starts to want to curve on its own too, which is helpful. And I just kind of get my, whoops, I pulled it out, needle up in there, and I work it as I go around to get my curve. Pretty soon I'm going to need a new thread. I'm running out of thread. So while I'm right here, I'm going to go ahead and finish off this thread, and I'm going to start a new thread. So I'm just going to poke my thread down into the back side. And you can see I'm not perfect. My dashes are a little too far apart in here. When I'm sitting and I'm calmer and not trying to show everything, it comes out a lot smoother and my stitches are getting a lot better. So to finish off a thread, I'm just going to come a little bit away from where I'm stitching, and I'm just going to grab onto a couple threads here, making sure it doesn't go through the top side. Make a little loop. And sometimes your thread wants to knot up at this point. And I'm just going to put my needle through. And you want to keep going through the big loop. And just do it a couple times and then knot it. And then I'm just going to pull my thread through between the backing and the applique piece. And I always take a look on the top, make sure that my needle didn't go through my applique piece. And that will hide or bury your thread. And I'm going to clip it off, and then I will rethread and knot a new piece to bring up under. I don't want to end up running out of thread on my turn, and I don't want to run out of thread when I get down into my point. So just to show this again, this is my needle threader. You want to make sure that the hole for your needle, you're going to be able to get it to go through this way. You don't want your needle eye to be going this way, or it won't thread properly. So just stick that straight down in there. Get my new piece of thread. Just lay your thread down through this little notch, and it has nice little numbers showing you what to do. And there's good instructions right on the packaging for this. And then you just press your lever down, and then slowly pull your needle up out of here, and you'll see your little loop. Just grab a hold of your loop and pull it through. And then I'm going to do my knot on the top of my needle here to make sure that I don't pull it out, because I can guarantee you that if I don't, while I'm showing this, I will lose my thread multiple times and irritate me. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my knot so I don't lose my thread out of my needle and have to rethread again. And like I said, it's just a simple knot. And I just do 2, 3. It just keeps my thread on my needle so I don't lose it. And then once again, to make my knot, I'm just holding my thread straight out, laying my needle on it, on my finger. I'm going to wrap this around about 6, 8 times. I lose count when I'm talking. But about 6, 8 times I'll go around. I'm going to hold it like this on one finger. And then I'm going to take my other finger and press it up against and grab the back side of it with my other finger. I've got my little tail sticking out. I'm holding on to it. I'm going to grab my needle from the top and just pull it through, holding those together. And there's my knot. And I'm just going to make a smaller tail for when I'm burying it. And since I'm continuing on from where I left off, I'm just going to bring my needle up underneath. Which will hide my knot between my applique piece. And you can see, even with a little bit of a tug, that little tiny knot doesn't come through. So as I continue to go around, I'm wanting to not have any little jags sticking out. So make sure to use your needle to go up underneath and smooth that out for you. And if it's still pokey, if you see like a little pokey sticking out and it's not curving the way that you want, just pull it back out and work at it again. There's nothing wrong with having to redo it. Now, the more that you practice, the smoother all of this is going to get. And then once you feel that you have a nice curve and you're liking it, just kind of roll it with your fingers too. Sometimes that helps get the curve going and take out the little picky point that was sticking out. And then just continue doing your stitches around. And as you're going across your curve, it is good to do your stitches just a little bit closer together. I'm having a harder time doing that in the video because of how I'm having to hold everything. I sit a little bit different when I'm sitting comfortable, and so my stitching's kind of all over the place up in here, which is not what you want. You want nice, smooth stitches going around. And I can tell you that hand sewing is not something that I do a lot of. But I am enjoying this a little bit more when I'm able to sit comfortable. I kind of have everything, forward away from me, where I'm usually working in a more comfortable position. So as you go around your curve, try to keep your stitches just a little bit closer to each other, not so far apart, so that you can keep a nice smooth curve. I would have liked a little bit, and some of that is the color of the fabric because I have just a little bit of this cream color coming out, and it's looking like a pokey, but when I touch it and feel it, it's actually a smooth curve. It's just, it looks funky because of how that coloring is. So just keep readjusting it in your fingers. And when you're working on a curve, you do a little more poking underneath and smoothing as you go than you do on a straightaway. On a straightaway, you can almost do like an inch ahead of you, but when you're working on a curve, you kind of go a little bit of a time, trying to keep that curve and keep it nice and smooth. Roll that with my fingers just a little bit, and I can see that it's not sitting under there the way that I want. So I'm just going to work at it a little bit so I can get it smoother. So I'm going to go ahead and take that pin out. I'm going to do a couple more stitches here going around, and then I'm going to clip that. And as you get more around your curve too, your piece just starts to go a little nicer underneath for you. It's like it almost now wants to do it. Okay, so I'm going to clip straight down, and I'm going to clip it right to the point. And they say that us beginners tend to, and it's true, I get nervous about it. I'm like, oh, maybe a thread or two away. If you do a thread or two away, and I've done it in the beginning when I was practicing, you end up with this curving. Like, you don't get a point there. You get, it will curve. So instead of having your curve here, you'll have like an inner curve. And we tend to want to do that because we're worried about the frame is basically what it is. So you want to do a straight down cut, and you want it to be the width of your, and I didn't trim this side to my seam allowance, so let me adjust that. So you want your seam allowance, which would be your 3/16 of an inch, and you're going to do it straight down to that point. And the closer that we get to that point, we're going to want our stitches to get closer together, just like we did with the bottom point. So keep working your curve. I'm telling you, I have more trouble with my thread grabbing the other fabric than I do the pins that I'm using. Now I tend to grab my fabric with my finger and kind of, and I use my pinky and I kind of hold it down so I can see where it's coming out the side, and I can see where I need my needle to go down in the backing fabric right next to it, and then use these fingers to rock my fabric. So I just tend to grab that thread that way out of my way. Whoops. So as we get closer down here, you're going to want to take your needle, just push this up underneath, and we're going to be we're finishing our curve off right here. Our stitches are getting closer together for stability. I have what I call gardening fingers right now. We're in that season where we're doing stuff outside, then we come inside, and fingernails look grubby. And I have to soak my hands, and I didn't have a chance. I keep getting this tickle in my throat. We're getting a little rain today, which is nice. Which meant I didn't have to go out and water my plants. Okay, so as we get down to this point, where we have reduced amount of fabric for our seam allowance. So this is another reason why we will want to use closer together stitches as we're getting down there. So now I poke that underneath, and it's coming out of the curve, and it's going to go straight down into my point. And I'm just going to take my needle, and I'm kind of poking the very edge of that fabric and bringing it down to my point. I had it. And of course now it doesn't want to do it for me. So I'm going to grab that edge again and poke that underneath. And you don't want to overdo it because you don't want a little pleat there. You want it to go straight down into that point of yours and be nice and straight. And once you're confident that it's nice and straight right there, just run your needle up underneath, ease it out. And now we're going to make sure that we do smaller stitches, or closer, I should say, not smaller stitches, but closer to, because they're all supposed to be small stitches, but closer together stitches, because we want to support this area so that it's not going to fray. I get just a little closer. I got a little, there we go. Get that out of the way. And I'm almost to my point. And when I get down to my point, I'm going to do one more stitch here to get down to my point. I'm going to do one more small stitch before. Okay. So now I'm almost to my point. I know it's hard with that marker color, but I'm going to go in the backing fabric right where that point is. And instead of my needle staying straight this way, I'm going to have my needle going this way to the side. And I'm going to go down in the backing fabric right where above that point, and I'm going to have my needle come out right at the point. And I'm going to kind of do like 3, 4, 5 stitches going around this point. And I want my needle, as much as possible, to go down into the backing fabric in the same exact spot, but come up right next to my previous stitch. So it will look almost like a shell going around, or a half circle going around. So I'm going to do about 3 right now, keeping them close together, because this is what is going to take the place of the fact that you really don't have any seam allowance in that point at all, because we clip down to the point. So we're using the thread to make up for the fact that there's really not a seam allowance there and we're just stitching into the fabric to support it. Now, if you have fabric that would fray a little bit more, this can be a little more frustrating. That's my Chow Chow making a bunch of noise. She likes to come down. She likes that she echoes down here. So now I'm going to turn my hand and I'm going to take this fabric and I'm going to grab it with my needle and push it straight underneath so I get a nice straight line on this side of my point. And I do have one little ravel piece there that I'm going to sneak it right underneath and poke it under there. And so from here, once you know that you've got your nice straight line that you want, like you did on this side coming into your point, we're going to do 2 or 3 more stitches with our needle going straight down into that same hole that you were using in the center. Whoops. I'm gonna push that back under just a little bit. There we go. Do a little tug on my thread. Line that back up. And so we're using that same hole going into our backing right now and coming out right next to our previous stitch. And we're going to do two to three more of those because we want a nice secure center of our inner point. Now you can see, well, probably can see the marker more than you can my stitches, but if I didn't use a marker and had used chalk, you would see my threads a little more. But what I wanted to tell you was you will see, if you're looking really microscopically close, you'll see those stitches that you do around right there. I gotta tuck that. I let go of my fabric. So I just gotta tuck that back up under there. Smooth it back out because I'm going to be coming out of my inward point and I'm going to be working back into a curve. So I'm just going to take a couple close stitches and now my needle goes back to being straight up and down to the side. And we're going to do some close together stitches in here for support. And then we're going to be going back into working our curve going around. And this will be the same thing as on this side. We want to gradually work that curve. And I find that this part is the part that I end up needing a little more practice on keeping the curve because it tends to, coming out of my V, wanting to go, too much straight, and I've got to work with smaller stitches right in here for support and to go into that curve. And just readjust your fingers as you need with your piece. And just a little at a time. Work your fabric around. Check it to see that it's curving the way that you want. And and do your stitches. Now we don't need them as close together again. And this is where I'm going to once again put my needle up under there and help that go into that curve for me. And I'm going to get this pin out of here because that's creating a little resistance in the fabric. And just a little at a time, work your curve, going back around this side. Yeah, for me, I don't think I like using the marker to mark with. I like using chalk better. But it did help to see. And I think my knot came out around my needle because I only put 2 knots on it instead of 3. So as you can see, going back around, we have to ease it back into a curve so it doesn't stay too straight coming out of the curve. And that takes a little bit of practice. And usually when you start to see it pocket ahead of you, you can tell that it's getting about time that you've got to work your curve. And just ease it back and forth with your needle and your fingers, smoothing it out. And just smaller stitches through here because you can only work a small space at a time to get around that curve. And I have to readjust my hands a few times. I went and stitched my bottom. Oh well. It's a practice piece, so I'm not going to worry about it. But yeah, that's something you have to be careful about when you're doing this on a quilt, is I grabbed my piece when I tucked it under and I didn't keep my finger under there. So another goof that you have to watch out for. Since I'm just practicing, I don't care. I want to be getting my stitching down. That's the most important part. And you just keep easing that curve. And if you get a piece that's poking out on you, or looks like it's poking out on you, you can just take your needle and get it, come this way with it, and kind of get it underneath there and push it, and then ease it with your finger. Just smooth it out. And now I have it going back into my curve. And there we go. And so as you can see, as you work your way around, I'm getting my curve going. I have my curve over here. And I know it looks a little funky like right there, but that's because of using the marker. But it's getting a nice curve going around. And just use your needle, it doesn't matter which direction, you know, whatever's working to be able to smooth your piece out and get it the way that you need it so that you can stitch. But this is why they call it Needle Turn Applique, because you're actually using your needle to turn your fabric up underneath, and your fingers as well. But primarily your needle to get it under there, to bring it up underneath and smooth it out. And then once you get past your curve, whoops, and I lost my thread. So I'm going to stay right there because I'm going to have to rethread. But you've been able to see the technique for needle turn. I'm going to give you some time to practice with a heart. The techniques in the heart really are the majority of the techniques that you're going to need. Doing across your straightaway, going into a curve, doing your inner point, doing your straight points. Those are the majority of your techniques that you need for needle turn applique. Later on, I will come back. I don't know, it might be towards the end of this month or maybe even the beginning of next month. I will be coming back and I'll show you doing some letters, or at least, you know, a letter and maybe a star, seeing how, you know, going into a point and an inner point and coming out, you know, doing them kind of close together for a star type shape, how you would work around that, and maybe like a letter O or something like that so that you can see doing an inner curve. But I felt like the heart was a good start for you to practice your techniques and get used to smooth stitching. You want to practice getting them somewhat consistent going around, because the more consistent that your stitches are, the less noticeable your stitches will be. And whenever you're going into a troubled area, whether it's coming down into a point or coming out of a point, you want closer together stitches. As you're going around a curve, you will do closer together stitches, and then the fan stitching in an inner point helps to secure that fabric so it's not going to fray. If you're using fabric that frays a little bit more and you're worried about that, you can use a little bit of the Fray Check right in there. Now you can see the fan stitches that I did, but once this is, once this is all together, say this was in a quilt, once it gets quilted, your eyes will be going so many places in the quilt, you're not ever going to see that. You're just never going to see it unless somebody comes up with a magnifying glass and looks at it. They're not going to see it. So there we are with that. I hope that you will enjoy this tutorial. I hope it's been helpful. Now, for left-handers, the big difference for doing left-hand is that you would be holding your fabric with your thumb on this side, and you would be doing it with your needle on this side, and you would be coming in this way. Or you may opt, if you want it to go away from you, the way that I did with my right hand, you would hold it with this, and you would come this way around. If you want to stitch away from you, you have to figure out which is more comfortable, stitching away from you or towards you. I find stitching away from me goes smoother. Some find coming towards them works smoother. I'm not really left-handed, so trying to show something left-handed is quite awkward, and I'm already awkward enough. showing it with my right hand. But I wanted to get you started practicing with this. And like I said, we'll come back because I want to practice more with the lettering before I show it to you. But I've been practicing with some O's and some A's because you have that inner curve inside. And it's a little bit different doing lettering, but I think lettering on an applique quilt can be really, really cute. Or like on a cover pillow or something like that is really, really cute. So we'll be coming back to do some of that at a later time. In the meantime, this will, practice with hearts, and then maybe practice with some petals, leaves rather, and add some petals going around. And we'll be coming back also to show machine stitching for applique and reverse applique as well. So we're going to look at we're looking at different ways of doing applique. Some is situational, which way you would do it, and some is just a matter of preference. Everybody's different. People like different things. Some people like applique, some people don't. Some people like different ways of doing it. So I'm trying to introduce you to different forms of doing the applique so that you can find what works best for you. So I hope that you'll take a moment to like our video, comment, subscribe to our channel. If you click on the little bell next to the subscribe button, you can change your notifications to all. And then as more and more tutorials come up, we're going to be doing some tutorials on binding for quilts, and we'll have some more sewing techniques coming up. And I hope that you will enjoy them. In the meantime, I wish you happy sewing.